Fantastic. Welcome to XL Catlin Arctic Live and our penultimate YouTube live session this year. Very exciting to be with you with this stream timed for those schools following on the western coast. And our penultimate YouTube live session. We just got ourselves tangled up there with our own stream. Let's get back here. And where were we? So timing this stream for schools following Pacific sort of mountain time over in the US. We would love to be outside, but it is dark. It is blowing a hoolie, and that is a technical term from Scotland. And there's a lot of snow knocking around too. So without destroying any more equipment, we're now in the UK Arctic Research Station's computer room in Ny-Ålesund, up in Svalbard. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Bianca.
And we were just going to see whether we've got any chats coming through on the, here we go. Hi, Martha, Ricardo, Mary, lovely to see you. What kind of things do you see in the Arctic that are different from what you see at home? Well, just the sort of white hideousness in terms of weather.
Well, I'm from Canada, and we see white hideousness, as Jamie calls it, quite a lot. But here, there's no trees, and there's nothing to block it, so it's actually just really cold and huge drifts of snow outside. Yeah.
How cold is it?
It's about -7, I think, outside now. The temperature's going down a bit. It's supposed to get down to -20 tomorrow, and it was about +1 yesterday. So we're kind of on a downward trend.
-20 the day before, -53 the day before, +8 no, not +8, but it's just been absolutely bonkers. It's been up and down like a yo-yo. Much cozier. Thank you very much, Helen. Much cozier in the computer room with a cup of tea. Not quite Yorkshire tea, but we'll make do up here.
If the Earth continues to heat up, the ice and snow melts, where will the Arctic animals like polar bears go? Question from Brooklyn in Pennsylvania. That's a great question. Really, what we think will happen as the planet warms is that the Arctic animals will get sort of squeezed into smaller habitat. And so actually what we're seeing right now is that there's a lot of plants and animals that are migrating northward. But at the same time, some of the Arctic animals are kind of staying in the same place. And so there's sort of like a habitat crossover. So for example, polar bears are now breeding with grizzly bears because the grizzly bears are moving further north. And the polar bears are sort of in the same place. And so now there's sort of interbreeding. So there's actually like a hybrid now that's called a growler. I think other people like to call it a pizzly, but it's kind of interesting. So across this sort of where these two habitats overlap, there's hybrid bears, and so maybe we'll see more things like that.
Well, you mentioning before that there was one population of polar bears that has adapted its feeding behavior and is now hunting for fish in much the same way as sort of brown bears.
Yeah, in Labrador, the Inuit there are saying that they're seeing now polar bears behaving more like black bears. And so they're going onto the land where there's less sea ice and less seals to hunt. They're now kind of going onto the land and behaving more like black bears. They're hunting in the rivers, fishing in the rivers, and they're sort of tearing through the ground a little bit more and sort of behaving more like a terrestrial bear than a marine bear. Could you explain how you do research in a glacier? What can you find out and how?
So the research this year has been about glaciers, and importantly also what happens inside a glacier. So there's a lot of research done on the overall size, overall shape of glaciers, how fast they're retreating, that kind of thing, and a little bit done on sort of what the internal dynamics might be using ground penetrating radar. But that only gives you so much information. And so what the research has been doing this year is actually looking at the melt channels that go through a glacier and what those look like and accurately describe them. The way that's being done is by using a laser scanner that sort of pings a laser beam. It sort of sits on a tripod, pings a laser beam at the walls, and the time it takes the laser to reflect back, and you can calculate the distance of these sort of thousands of points, and that's called a point cloud. And then that can start to make up a three-dimensional digital sort of idea of the inside of a glacier, and you can start then to analyze that and understand these places better. But just by being inside, Jane was saying yesterday, Jane, who's leading the research here, just by being inside and seeing it firsthand is really great. And I think from what we've heard from and speaking to people here, that no one had really been above the frozen waterfall in the ice channel and glacial channel that we were exploring. So that's mapping something for the first time and seeing something for the first time, which is really special.
It also tells us a little bit how the inner plumbing of a glacier works, which is kind of important for how you move meltwater around and how glaciers behave in general. Do you think it's possible for us to stop global warming? Question from 8-year-old Justin from Pennsylvania. It's a great question, Justin. I think because we've already put so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we're kind of locked into a certain amount of warming. But there's really exciting research that's models that are showing that there's different levels of emissions. And so if we stop producing greenhouse gases now or slowly in the near future, then we can end up with a different level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And each of those different levels of greenhouse gases has really different consequences. And so it's not actually until you start getting to really, really long time scale, lots of emissions, that you start getting these really kind of scary consequences. So I think we're still actually at a time where there's quite a lot of action that can be taken, and climate change, we're going to have climate change no matter what, but we can reduce the sort of overall general impact of it.
I mean, it looks like we're going to lose an ecosystem. It looks like we're going to lose the sort of coral ecosystem to a certain degree.
Yeah, and we're losing the sort of Arctic sea ice as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for ecosystems, there's definitely consequences, and some of those are not necessarily reversible. But in terms of, massive ice sheet collapse and things like that, I think that we still have lots of time and lots of movement for action and lots of policy decisions that can help change that. Go ahead.
Question from Miss Malmquist class. How do you think the future will look like when it comes to the ice melting? I was going to move this up a bit. When it comes to the ice melting, I don't know quite where to start with that. I mean, less ice. I think it's a sort of very, very basic answer. And the impact, for instance, less sea ice would have on the Arctic ecosystem would be everything from less algal formation and marine snow falling especially in the winter months or spring, Arctic spring, and being able to feed life throughout the water column. There'd be, we talked about polar bears already and how much the traditional hunting ground of the sea ice would affect their populations, and sort of seal reproduction and sort of narwhals hiding from orcas. I think was one I saw the other day. So it will look different. It will place stresses. I think talking on sort of threats to habitats. Something we should come across this term stress a lot. It's going to stress a lot of different animals and life up here. And then on a terrestrial front, less. What's the world going to look like? When the glaciers retreat. I think interestingly, there was a team up here 2 years ago who was looking at that very thing. As the glaciers retreat from essentially the shores of the fjord around here, how soon will that previously sort of ice-covered area become productive again? Will there be plants? What are the bacteria that will help that happen? Are they present in the snow already? What is the sequencing going to be? And they said it was a bit like looking at sort of first life, especially in these places where there hasn't been, a bit of ground that's been covered by ice for 10,000 years. What's going to happen there? And it's still a really interesting sort of open area for research. And you've probably got some
Well, this actually leads into the next question, which is what are the results of your research concerning the climate change? One of the things that I do as a paleoclimatologist is to figure out how past climates have changed and how our recent warming fits into a much longer timescale perspective. And one of the ways that I've been doing that is on the coast of Greenland, for example, looking at how these landscapes have evolved since the ice retreated. So it's actually a pretty good analog for what we're seeing in the future with warming and how landscapes evolve and how they respond to climate change. And one of the things that's quite interesting is that we see, most of these lakes, as the ice retreats, they develop life really quickly. And there's lots of changes in the landscape with the establishment of vegetation and soils and microbial communities where you sort of see this progression that you can see in most lakes. And so those things can be quite predictable. But one of the things that we're seeing actually in recent times is that we've kind of gone outside of normal in a lot of lakes. So for the last sort of 3,000 years, we've been in kind of a cold period in the Arctic. And now we're coming out of that, and we've come out of that really rapidly. And so sort of the last 100 years are pretty unprecedented in the context of the last several thousand. So we're seeing really large ecological changes. And I think if you add on to that losing ice across the landscape, then you're kind of getting into a very different climate situation or a different environmental situation than we've had before. Sorry, that was another one.
No problem. You're probably living on from that best place to talk about. I mean, will there be a new ice age? The answer is most probably yes. When and how and everything else.
Yeah, well, we're supposed to be going into an ice age right now. If you look at the sort of the way that ice ages start, and it usually has to do with how much solar energy or how much sun different parts of the earth are receiving, and we're actually sort of slated for an ice age right now, and we should be cooling. We're kind of reversing that, and so there's this feeling, I think, in a lot of the climate community that we've kind of broken the system a little bit. So it's a good question whether or not there will be a new ice age. There certainly won't be a new ice age for hundreds and maybe thousands of years, and so I think that's probably the best of my knowledge answer.
Do you have weapons, and why do you need them? We do carry weapons when we leave the village, as it were, and there's two kinds. There's a rifle and a flare pistol or signal gun, and these are carried for polar bear safety. So the flare pistol or signal gun used to try and scare the polar bear away. So it's essentially like launching a firework towards a polar bear and the bang to scare it off. You really don't want to get into a situation where it's a sort of you might need to shoot a polar bear. The best thing to do is try and scare it away, or get on a skidoo and drive off. We're on their patch. And it's to do as much as possible to scare them off before contemplating using the rifle.
When will more people outside of the Arctic region will start feeling climate change affecting them? Would it be too late to change something then? That's a great question. I think people are feeling the effects of climate change outside of Arctic regions already. It's just a matter, I guess, of how big those changes are and how big a change you need to start acting.
I think also that some of the changes that you might see in other parts of the world, people have been talking about the sort of lack of water and some droughts in the Middle East and in Darfur and those kind of things. A lot of the impacts of climate change, people sort of are being sort of shown in water, lack of or too much.
Yeah.
And so it's I think the Arctic is a very easy part of the world to understand in terms of the impact of climate change, because it's basically like someone's turned the heat up, stuff is melting, which is the sort of basic conception that we have. Whereas climate change may make somewhere cooler or drier or wetter, or it's a bit more or stormier. For instance, and so it's a bit harder to grasp. Okay, there's more energy in the climate system, and it's expressing itself like this. I think the Arctic is a very easy one to get.
Yeah. But there have been some really interesting studies recently showing where in the world people will no longer be able to work outside. There's some sort of quite scary maps showing where temperatures are going to be too high for people to work. And so a lot of areas that are currently quite hot, if they experience any more heat, will actually become unsuited to human occupation, essentially. So, you know, hopefully we don't get to the point where it's too late to change something. I mean, I think it's never going to be too late to change something, but it'd be nice to make change before those really negative consequences become apparent.
I think also that the changes in the Arctic don't just affect the Arctic.
Yeah, right. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic.
No. You know, everything from ocean circulation to climate, those types of big,
yeah,
big global processes affected by changes up here. Have you ever seen any plants around there? I have never seen a plant growing in Svalbard. It's always been covered by snow.
Jamie's just here the wrong time of year. I was actually I saw today that there's 165 species of plants in Svalbard. So it's actually pretty diverse, and they're all very small. So there's lots of plants, but right now they're completely buried under snow, so we can't see anything. But the caribou are trying their best.
Yeah, nosing around.
To get at them.
Yeah, which is why it's really, really bad on that note if it rains at this time of year. Because that rain then freezes into ice, and it's much harder for the caribou reindeer to then sort of nose through and get to some food. Is it possible to spend 1 minute outside in a t-shirt? Yes.
You'd get quite cold though.
It's not, wouldn't be very nice. But yes, I don't think, you know, where would it be? I think at most temperatures you could probably get away with.
No, I think actually on the weekend when it was minus 53 with the wind chill, it would have been, you would have had some degree of
Frost,
cell damage.
Cell damage,
Yeah.
Yeah, anything down about minus 40.
Yeah. Is there a visible sea level rise? Not really. It's still in the order of millimeters. And so it's hard to see those things unless you have a really good gauge and you mark it out and keep marking it out. I mean, that's actually a great thing to do over decades if you've got a long-term plan. But yeah, it's not really visible at this point.
We can see the visible process contributing to it.
Yeah, you can.
That's more visible than the sea level rise itself.
Is it hard to study in the Arctic, and why? Well, there's multiple answers to that question, I think. There's the sort of physical thing, which is, yeah, it's harder to work in the Arctic because of cold and because of, you know, the getting around on snow or getting around in cold areas is tricky. Logistically, it's quite tricky to work in the Arctic because there's less sort of infrastructure and support here. And so, you know, if you want to go to a distant camp, you need to figure out how you're going to get there. If you want to go there in the summer, then you need to get dropped off by boat or in a helicopter. I don't even know if Svalbard has helicopters, but I guess the system now does. So it requires quite a lot of planning, and logistically it's quite challenging, and so that's also quite expensive to do work in the Arctic. But on the flip side, it's also really an interesting place because it's changing so rapidly, and you know, if we're going to learn about the processes of climate change and how organisms respond to any kind of change, this is a great kind of living laboratory for doing it.
And I think just to point out is the importance that we talk about the UK Arctic Research Station, we talk about the other stations here, is that most countries have these organisations that support researchers in these more remote and challenging environments. And for this station, the NERC station here, operated by the British Antarctic Survey, you know, without that, there would be far fewer opportunities for British researchers to come and study in the Arctic. So it is hard, but what's great is that we actually have publicly funded research stations in these remote regions, both polar regions, in fact, that support our understanding. So to be very proud, everyone, of the role that citizens as taxpayers do in increasing our understanding.
Yeah, and there have been some great efforts over the years with the International Polar Year, for example, really getting new students in the Arctic and providing infrastructure for people to do more work in the polar regions.
Yeah, it should be much more difficult than it is.
Is Greenland an archipelago connected by ice? No, there's certainly islands in Greenland, but the mass of Greenland is above sea level, which means actually that Greenland can contribute a huge amount of sea level rise relative to places that are kind of more floating ice shelves, for example.
I mean, I think there was an article a few years ago that sort of put forward this theory that in fact, if you took all the ice away, it wouldn't be this shape that we see on a map. It would be, you know, a series of islands.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. There might be parts of it right now that are under, but if you took the ice off, then it would...
Geostatic rebound.
Yes. Geostatic
rebound, bounce back. Essentially, when your arms lift up after you've carried heavy bags.
Yes.
The Earth does the same thing.
Bianca, what do you do when you're not in the Arctic? What sort of research do you do? I'm a scientist at the British Antarctic Survey. I work as a paleoclimatologist, which means that I try to reconstruct changes in climate going back in the past, like thousands of years and tens of thousands of years. Right now I've been working in the sub-Antarctic and also a bit in the Arctic, up in here in Svalbard, reconstructing how the ice sheets, after the ice sheets came off Svalbard, how the landscape changed, and doing the same thing in Greenland as well. And the kind of work that I do is I collect lake sediment cores and look at, basically a lake sediment core is an archive of everything that's happened in the landscape over time. And so if you take a core out of a lake, you can date it and you can go back thousands of years and you can look at the pollen and the insects and the algae and the chemistry, and then those things will tell you how the environment has changed. And so I sort of like a little bit like detective work in a way. I kind of put things under the microscope and see how the environment has changed. And that gives us a sense of kind of what natural variability is like in the climate system in the Arctic and then the Antarctic, and how recent changes kind of fit into that long-term context. Another long answer.
What's the difference between a scientist, an explorer, and an adventurer? I think these are all sort of terms that get bandied around. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. I think you can be a scientist, an explorer, and an adventurer. Especially doing remote and science in the polar regions. You could be doing all those things. You could go on your adventure to get there. You could explore new places and contribute to the body of scientific knowledge in a structured way. I think that there are these debates that are had. I think that you probably see stories in the newspapers of polar explorers who have crossed this bit or walked across here or polar sticked from here to X to Y or whatever. My own personal view is that the real explorers in the polar regions and pretty well anywhere else are scientists. Are scientists working in remote and extreme environments, pushing back the frontiers of our knowledge, helping us understand our changing planet, and putting up with some pretty tough conditions as they do it. I think if you look at what you've done yourself and seen colleagues, and I've pleasure of working with scientists who have put themselves through pretty gnarly conditions to get their data, to get their samples. Really, really astounding, and who are sometimes, I don't know what certainly the people going down for sort of multi-year projects in the past, I don't know whether that's the case anymore, but truly astonishing stuff. All completely valid. I personally have the greatest respect for the science community and the amount they put themselves through to grow our understanding of our changing planet.
That was very nice. What would you say to kids who love geography but don't quite know what careers to choose after they finish school? That's a great question. I don't think I ever really knew what career I wanted. I think I followed my interests and followed what I was interested in and tried to keep doing it, and sort of, yeah, followed the opportunities as they arose. I kept an open mind, and kind of those things kind of lead you in the direction that you want to be. So, I mean, it's hard to know when you're a student kind of what opportunities there are. And it's maybe hard to know now what opportunities will be around in 10 or 15 years. You know, these jobs are constantly changing. So you could say that you could be a geographer, but there'll be hundreds of different kinds of geographer. So I think really the trick is to find something you're interested in, or just follow your passions and your interests. And then those will lead you kind of where you need to be.
Yeah, keep on following your passions. Stay curious, and geography is a great subject to keep on studying after school as well in higher education. Are there any two-tusked narwhals there?
We've been asked this question.
I don't know. Well, I mean, there's the 3 that were by the island earlier today, and they were all just happily swimming around. But apart from that, I haven't seen any more than those 3. What about you, Bianca?
No, no, I haven't.
Truth be told, we get asked a lot of animal questions on Arctic Live, and there are very, very few animals up here at this time of year. And so now we're at the end of week 2, our answers have become slightly, or have diverged slightly from the truth, or diverged very much from the truth. Some of the classes I've been speaking to, my answers have diverged from the truth. I've introduced, some classes to the Svalbard horned penguin, the only species of northern hemisphere penguin, which of course doesn't exist. Two-tusked narwhals, we've never heard of one.
I've never seen a one-tusked narwhal, actually. So
can we just start what are those campaigns? Kickstarter campaign for a narwhal expedition. Arctic Live goes narwhal spotting. If we could start that now, we'd be more than happy to talk to you from Narwhal Central, somewhere near Ellesmere Island, possibly.
Yeah, possibly. Greenland. I'm going to give the serious answer to that question, though, which is that, there's lots of mutations, and if there's a two-tusked narwhal, then it would be a mutation. So it wouldn't be kind of a normal thing, unless there was some reason why two-tusked narwhals did better than one-tusked narwhals. So I haven't actually heard of two-tusked narwhals, but that's the second time that I've had that question, and so I wonder whether there's some evidence for one somewhere that I haven't seen. But I certainly haven't seen one, and I haven't heard of one either. But it's possible that it exists, but maybe not as a true kind of type of narwhal, but maybe just as a sort of random mutation. Sorry, that was a boring answer to your.
It's okay. But you can still launch and contribute to the Kickstarter campaign. Don't feel you need to.
Don't feel like I quashed your interest.
Is it possible for someone who wants to go to the Arctic just to go, or do you always need permission? So countries in the Arctic Circle, quite a few of them, Canada being a great example, Norway as well, tip of Iceland, Sweden, Finland, Russia, Greenland, Alaska. I think that's about it. So you can go to the Arctic, but I think there are probably some more remote areas that will be, it's easier to get to if you're part of a project.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can actually go anywhere in the Arctic. You don't need permission necessarily unless you're in a national park. And the trick is logistics. There's lots of communities that are easy to get to. A lot of the communities in Canada are small villages. People live there, planes fly in and out. They're expensive, but you can get there. Same in Greenland. Here, it's quite easy to get to Longyearbyen. It's not so easy to get to New Allison, but you can go anywhere in the Arctic. It's not limited that way.
Svalbard, I think, there's getting the tourist routes are a little bit limited. And,
right. Okay.
Terrestrial protection is up here, but yeah.
But you can definitely go to the Arctic. You don't need to first to get permission.
You have our permission to go to the Arctic.
You have Jamie's permission.
Go is wonderful. Can you keep copepods in an aquarium? Yes, you can. Dr. Kerry Lewis had a copepod aquarium type thing in the Arctic.
Really?
Yeah, so she crawled for copepods and then put them in different seawater conditions for predicted climate change.
Okay.
And then all those bottles were then put into another ice hole to keep them at sort of a mesocosm, so they're roughly the same conditions. And quite a few of them died, but that may probably not due to bad aquarium keeping habits, but due to
natural
the
mortality.
Well, to the different conditions, so it's comparing the different conditions and predicted mortality across two species, which named I can't exactly remember, and also the larva.
So yes.
Yes, you can. What if copepods eat microplastics?
I don't know.
I mean, they do eat microplastics, but I'm trying to link this into aquarium keeping ability. Copepods
I don't know if it's related to the aquarium. Maybe it's just a separate question.
A separate question. What if copepods eat microplastics? It can do a few things. Primarily, it can block their guts and stop them from eating other stuff, which reduces energy available for metabolic functions.
That's a good answer. That's the longest period an explorer has spent in the Arctic. Gosh, that's a tricky question. You know,
I was going to go for an answer, which would be, I would say that some of the indigenous peoples are truly explorers of this area, and they just live here full time.
That's what I was going to say. That people have lived in the Arctic for thousands of years, and so they're the real Arctic people, the Arctic explorers. So yeah, they've lived their whole lives here and for thousands of years. Yeah.
Both on the same message there.
Mm.
And that was a separate question. Can you show us the sunset?
It's already dark here. It's really dark and tons of blowing snow. It's actually not so not so nice this evening. It's not like last night that was the perfect pink sunset. And yeah, we've had some really large changes in the weather.
Can you bury anything under the ice?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can bury anything under the ice.
You can bury anything that's small enough to fit under the ice.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of ice. So
yeah, there's not so much sea ice, but there's lots of glacier ice.
I mean, Ricardo, was there anything you had in mind in terms of burying under the ice? Coffee stash.
That said, actually, it's quite difficult to get under the ice because the ground is frozen and the ice is frozen, so it requires a lot of.
Will it come up when the ice melts?
Oh.
I think that this could be the dead bodies coming out of the ground.
Yeah, we have some weird jokes in Greenland about people who've gone across the ice sheet and have died, and then over time their bodies get sort of buried by the snow, and eventually they get entrained in the ice. And there have been lots of estimates of where these bodies would show up after a while. So yeah, they do. People do melt out of the ice. There's a great example in Switzerland of Ötzi. I think his name's Ötzi. He's an ancient, like thousands of year old hunter who was, I guess, fell into a crevasse and then popped out the other end a couple decades ago, 2 decades ago. And they found some amazing things on him. First of all, like all of his clothing was amazing, and his body was really well preserved. So they learned a lot about ancient peoples in the Alps through that.
And then that we also have the I think some Russian graves here. People being pushed up through the permafrost.
Yeah, the permafrost. Yeah, you get ice heaving. So if different parts of the ground are frozen at different times, then things tend to get churned up in the ground, and so yeah, you can have exhumation of things.
Yeah,
including bodies.
including bodies, and so that's why we're not allowed to die on Svalbard.
Oh, is that why?
It's illegal because there's nowhere to you can't be buried, and there's fuel scarcity really for cremating you, and there's no crematorium.
It's a bit dark, Jamie.
It is a little bit dark, but it's there we are.
When are you coming back?
To the Arctic, to the UK.
I'm coming back to the Arctic, not to the UK Arctic Research Station. I'm coming back to the Arctic, to Greenland in May. So I've got a little over a month and a half at home before I come back up again.
And I'm not due to come back until next year.
1 year from now.
1 year from now. And any interesting stories that the research station manager told you in the past days and you might share with the public? No, not really. Not really. I mean, I think amazing stories. Nick is retiring very soon and is writing a book. So you'll have to wait for that to come out. Amazing stories. Or you can very quickly we'll try and get yourself on a research expedition to the UK Arctic Research Station this summer. There's, I think, the 2 ways you're going to hear the stories.
So what was the first way?
Buy Nick's book.
Oh, yeah. Also, maybe we could get him on a YouTube live session once. And
so you try to do that tomorrow.
He could answer questions because he's 42 years of working the polar regions. It's a lot of experience and some of the most amazing dog sled journeys and things like that.
Yeah.
Really remarkable to have sort of seen the whole history of research in the Antarctic and how it's developed over the years. It's really pretty, he's a real gem. That's what you wanted to know. Okay.
Perfect.
Yes.
I think it's dinner time. Is it dinner time?
It is dinner time.
It's dinner time in the Arctic. It's been truly wonderful to speak to you again. We have our final Arctic Live YouTube session tomorrow. So that will be a great celebration, and I'm very sad to be leaving Ny-Ålesund. And we just got that final question. Any books you'd like to recommend to younger wannabe scientists?
You know, I don't have a book so much about science, but there's a book called Arctic Dreams by Barry Lopez that is my favorite book about the Arctic. It's really beautifully written, and it conveys the beauty and the magic of the Arctic, and it also tells you huge amounts of information about the Arctic. So if somebody's interested in reading about the Arctic, it's really kind of the sort of gold standard of Arctic literature.
That's great. One of my favorite polar books too, but for young scientists.
That's not so young scientist.
Potentially an amateur naturalist by Gerald Durrell, which is wonderful about sort of just bugs and beasties and collecting and asking questions and sort of picking up skulls and that kind of stuff.
Cool.
What's for dinner? We're not quite sure. I don't know. Not reindeer, that was last night.
And today at lunch.
But lovely speaking to you all, and it's over and out from the Arctic.
Thank you.
Look forward to speaking tomorrow.